Pressure is the only god that does not listen to prayers. At 40 fathoms, the sea is no longer a mother. It is a giant's fist, closing slowly around anything that dares to breathe. Ornolf the smith felt the god's grip in the groaning of the Skelvarg's ribs. Every beam of seasoned oak, every iron rivet, and every inch of the starbone, was screaming. He stood in the waist of the ship, his boots braced against the central mast, his hammer ringing against the black iridescent plates he had bolted to the ship's hull. The starbone, scavenged from the shattered carcass of a fallen harvester vessel, was a living metal, oily to the touch and pulsing with a faint, rhythmic heat. It was the only thing standing between the crew and a sudden violent transformation into red mist. "Hold the line, Sigrun," Ornolf bellowed, though his voice was swallowed by the roar of the intake. "If the starbone shifts, the sea drinks us all." Sigrun, his eldest, did not look back. She was lashed to the steering oar with thrice-braided seal hide, her knuckles white as bone. Ahead of them, the North Sea had opened its mouth. The Gulp-Hole, a massive rotating iris of mechanical obsidian, was dragging millions of gallons of water into the depths of the Skagerrak. It was the throat of the harvesters, the entry point to a hangar that sat like a cancer on the seafloor. "We are in the throat, father." Sigrun's scream was a high, thin thing against the thunder. The Skelvarg tipped. The prow, reinforced with a massive tusk of starbone, pointed straight down into the abyss. The ship didn't sail, it fell. They passed through the veil, a shimmering barrier of violet energy that separated the crushing weight of the ocean from the pressurized interior of the hangar. The transition was a physical blow. The ship slammed into the internal atmosphere of the hangar, a dense, oxygen-rich fog that smelled of cold grease and ancient salt. "Scorpions. Brace." From the shadows of the massive emerald-lit pillars that supported the hangar's vaulted roof, the scour crabs emerged. They were maintenance drones the size of warhounds, made of the same shifting black glass as the harvester ships. They didn't walk, they skittered across the ceiling and walls, their multi-jointed limbs ending in high-speed diamond saws. The first crab landed on the Skelvarg's starboard rail. Its orange sensor eye pulsed, and the saw blade on its forelimb hissed to life, biting into the oak. "Not today, you hollow devil." Torsten, the ship's strongest oarsman, lunged forward with a shock spear, a harpoon tipped with a captured alien power cell. The spear hit the crab in its central chassis. A discharge of white electricity erupted, frying the drone's internal circuitry. The machine spasmed and tumbled into the dark water below the docks, but 3 more took its place. Ornolf swung his heavy smithing hammer, catching a scour crab mid-leap. The starbone head of the hammer shattered the drone's glass shell, spraying the deck with a viscous, gray lubricant. He felt the vibration in his bones. The hangar was reacting. The emerald pillars were turning a frantic, aggressive red. "The siphon core is dead ahead." Sigrun pointed toward the center of the chamber. There it was, the heart of the deep. It was a gargantuan sphere of liquid violet light, suspended by massive pulsing cables that reached up into the seafloor above. This was the engine that powered the harvester's fleet, the pump that was draining the life resonance from the northern coasts. "Torsten, the fire barrels. Drop them into the intake." Ornolf commanded, his hands flying as he hammered a shifting plate back into place. The Skelvarg surged forward, propelled by the massive current of the Gulp-Hole. The scour crabs were swarming the hull now, hundreds of them, their saws create a screeching symphony as they tried to strip the starbone from the oak. The ship was literally being eaten alive. "Ornolf, the hull is breached." A jagged saw blade had punched through a gap in the armor near the prow. A jet of pressurized water, thin as a needle but sharp as a razor, lanced into the ship, instantly severing Torsten's leg at the knee. The man didn't even have time to yell before the secondary pressure hit him, crushing his chest. Ornolf didn't look at his friend. He couldn't. He grabbed a slab of raw starbone and slammed it over the breach. He didn't use rivets, he used the star torch, a handheld burner fueled by alien salts. The blue flame fused the metal to the wood in a spray of sparks. "Sigrun, steer into the eye." The Skelvarg reached the central sphere. The heat was immense, charring the dry parts of the mast and making the starbone plates glow a translucent, ghostly white. "Now." Sigrun yanked a lever, releasing the sea-bane barrels, 6 heavy casks filled with black powder and concentrated alien coolant. They rolled off the stern, falling straight into the intake vortex beneath the liquid violet sphere. Turn US or we burn." Sigrun slammed the oar hard to port. The Skelvarg skidded across the surface of the internal pool, the starbone tusk on the prow grinding against the obsidian dock with a roar of sparks. The explosion was not a sound, it was a total erasure of the senses. The seabane barrels detonated inside the siphon core. The liquid violet light didn't explode outward, it imploded. The gravity wells of the hangar failed, and the millions of tons of ocean water held back by the veil rushed in. The Skelvarg was caught in the mother of all surges. The ship was lifted like a toy by a wall of white water and freezing foam. Ornolf grabbed Sigrun, wrapping his massive arms around her as the ship was propelled upward through the Gulp-Hole, driven by the massive internal pressure of the hangar's collapse. The starbone plates, stressed beyond their limit, began to peel away, the metal turning into liquid and flying off into the dark. The oak groaned one last time, a terminal snap that echoed in Ornolf's ears. Then light. The Skelvarg broke the surface of the North Sea like a breaching whale. It flew 20 feet into the air before crashing back into the waves. The ship was a ruin. The mast was gone. The starbone was stripped away. Only the bare, blackened skeleton of the oak remained, floating in a sea of hissing foam and floating debris. Ornolf pulled himself up from the flooded deck. He coughed out a lungful of salt water and looked at Sigrun. She was alive, her hair matted with gray oil, staring at the horizon. Behind them the Skagerrak was churning. A massive whirlpool had formed where the Gulp-Hole used to be, drawing the last of the alien wreckage into the dark. Then, with a final deep thump that shook the surface of the water, the whirlpool flattened. The sea was quiet. The emerald light was gone. The thrumming that had haunted the coast for a year had finally ceased. Ornolf looked at his hands. They were covered in the black, oily residue of the starbone, a stain that would never wash away. He looked at the shattered remains of his hammer. He had used the bones of the stars to break the heart of the deep, and in doing so he had become a stranger to the land he saved. Sigrun unlashed herself from the broken oar. She didn't speak. She simply sat on the wreckage and looked at the gray Norwegian sky, which was finally, mercifully, clear of the black ships. The Skelvarg drifted. There were no oars left to pull and no sail to catch the wind. They were just two ghosts on a pile of floating wood, waiting for the tide to decide their fate. The water was cold, the salt was bitter, and the silence of the North Sea was the only reward they would ever receive. The iron is dead. The oak is broken. The sea is deep. The fog rolls back in, thick and honest, smelling of pine and wet earth. The wreck of the Longship disappears into the white, a silent monument to a battle that the world would call a myth. The waves lap against the blackened timber, and the heartbeat of the ocean returns to its slow, ancient rhythm. The work is finished, the fire is out, and the abyss has closed its eyes.